All right, the fundamentals of this topic are pretty straightforward. So hopefully this will be a fairly short video. The first thing I want to note is that when we talk about whether someone is employed or self-employed, we're first of all talking about an individual. Okay, individual. So none of this applies to anybody other than an individual. Having trouble with the U today. The other thing to note is that there isn't really a category of self-employed. You're either employed or you're in business. And we usually refer to you when you're in business and you're an individual as a sole proprietor. Okay, so we're not learning anything particularly new here. We know these people. We know employees. We know businesses. Okay, so what we have here is we have, forgive the artwork, we have an individual and then we have a business. Okay, but important to note here, this business does not have to be a corporation. This business itself could be a sole proprietorship or a partnership or a corporation. Okay, or other forms, but those are the three that we know. Okay, and so these two taxpayers enter into an agreement where work will be exchanged for cash or some other type of monetary economic compensation. Okay, so the Income Tax Act then comes along and it says, okay, well, we kind of think of things differently. We think of two types of income: employment income and business income. And we treat those differently. There are different rules applied if you are an individual or a business. But the act itself doesn't tell you whether you're employed. Case law will tell us, okay? But the first thing we have to note here is that it is this relationship that determines, like basically comes down here to this decision node and says, are you employment income or are you business income? It's the relationship between the two that we're trying to assess, not the individual themselves, not the business itself. It's the relationship between the two of them. Okay, so that's the first key piece of information. Next, the question arises fairly early. Do I want, having trouble today, to be self-employed? So is there bias? Is it like there's always it's always good to be one or the other? So what I want, is there, we'll just leave it at that. Well, maybe we'll not. So is there bias in it? And the answer is no. I mean, it really depends on each individual's preferences. And there are factors that, depending on where you are, what you like, what you don't like, you will decide whether you want to be self-employed or not. And so we do the simple kind of pro-con from a tax basis, from a tax point of view. Being self-employed, and we usually like to have an L in the word employed, being self-employed, basically this comes down to there is more under the Act that is deductible if you're self-employed than if you're employed. And we'll spend some time talking about what those are in a couple of weeks. Couple of classes, actually, next week. The con of being self-employed, though, from a tax perspective, is really administrative. Okay, meaning you have a lot to kind of do because you're a business. So you got to keep all your records, you got to keep everything, whereas the employee, really, a lot of that is taken care of. And from the non-tax side, I mean, we could list lots of things, and we'll talk about these in class, but at the end of the day, I see this as the con is risk and the pro is reward. Okay, so potential reward. Okay, so it's not guaranteed. When you're in business, you bear a lot of risk, and with risk comes gain and loss. Whereas the employee, it's kind of here's your pay scale, and as you work another year, we'll increase that a little bit. Possibility of some bonuses, but for the most part, it's just it's a known thing. The risk is low, and it's borne by the company. Okay, so that's basically the background there. But as far as how do I know? How do I know if I am if I'm the individual in this picture, how do I know that the relationship I have with my employer is whether I'm an employee or not? And really, at the end of the day, that is not hard to know in 95% of the cases. Okay, so just to be clear, this is usually obvious. Okay, if they hire you and call you an employee, you're probably going to be an employee. But what we're going to look at is the times when maybe it's not so clear, and maybe you want to be one, but you aren't really because you don't meet the facts. So how do you know? Well, there is case law in Canada that basically sets a precedent that tells you whether you are or not based on your facts. Okay, so if your facts match the precedent, then you are. And what this has come down to is 3, but it's really 5. I really don't understand why we say it's 3, but it's 3 tests that are really 5 tests. Okay, so what are those tests? The first one, the sub-piece, is control. The second one, the sub-piece, is ownership of tools. The third piece is the risk of chance of loss, chance of profit. I'll just put that as risk, profit. Who bears it, basically, is the question. And then the other 2 are this, what we call the integration. All these go by different names, and it doesn't really matter what you call them. It's that you understand the basics of it. And the last one is the specific result. And so what it comes down to, and again, this is not a checklist. Okay, so we have to be very careful. This is not a checklist. We're kind of back to that land of, well, we are back to that land of case law. Remember, intent on income versus capital. You can't just check lint. No, lint has nothing to do with this. Checklist, it's not a checklist, okay? But this is here to guide you. And so just quickly, what is this? Well, control is basically over what is done and how. If the business is determining what you do every day and how you do it, you look more like an employee than if you determine what you do every day. Okay, ownership of tools, I think that's pretty straightforward. Who owns them? And really, this one's straightforward too. Who bears it? And bears slash, well, let's just go with bear. Who bears it? Who bears the risk? Who gets the potential profit? Integration usually is thought of as like a percentage of income of the individual. So if you're getting most of your income from this source, you look more like an employee than if you're, spending 3 days a week somewhere else. You look less like an employee. And then the specific result one is, the key here is that it's specific. Okay, so the result can't be something like help the company earn profit, right? If it's like that, yeah, that's a result. That's something you've been hired to do, but that's not specific. Okay, so it's basically like a project or it's something that has an end, and it's a specific result that you have to reach. If you're doing that, you look less like an employee, because when that ends, it's assumed that your relationship ends. And then, of course, it becomes gray, because what if the next relationship, the next project is understood that you'll get that one too, and the one after that, and the one after that. Well, now we're into the gray area. So welcome back to case law, and we'll have more fun with this in class.